Hello, welcome to the next session for YA ThrillerCon. Today I'm joined by Dana and we're going to be discussing her debut novel, People Like Us, along with other YA thrillers and projects that she's working on now. So firstly, welcome Dana. Would you like to introduce yourself for viewers who haven't come across you before?
Oh, yeah. Well, you did a good job. Mele, I have written a couple YA thriller novels, and I'm not great at bios, so that's pretty much
okay.
like, yeah.
Okay, so do you want to start by talking a bit about your debut novel and just sort of like a brief summary to introduce it to readers who haven't come across this book before?
Sure. This is what it looks like. People Like Us. So this is a thriller, mystery thriller set in an all-girls boarding school in New England. Basically, a girl and her friends stumble upon a body when they're out, kind of like just hanging out one night. And the next morning, she starts receiving emails supposedly from the victim of this apparent murder, threatening her in the guise of like a sort of series of like recipe games. I don't know like where I came up with this, honestly. I know that's a question later, but and with a timed kind of, like if you don't do this task by this point, I'll release this horrible deep dark secret about your past, which isn't revealed right away. And those tasks all involve, unfortunately, kind of like destroying her friends' lives one by one. So she has to kind of race against the clock to try to not have to do that, and also prevent, herself from her own life being destroyed. And she also ends up becoming a murder suspect. So everything goes really well for her. And it's just, it's fun.
Yeah, I had so much fun when I read it. I think it was last year when I finally was able to read it, because I had to wait for the paperback to arrive in the UK, and there was like this massive hold up with all like postage and everything. And I just remember when I started reading it, I could not get through it fast enough because I was just like so invested right away. And yeah, like it's amazing. I recommend it to everyone. Like whenever anyone asks me for like book recommendations, I'm just like, you have to read this one because it is so good. And I'm just like a massive fan of it. And I think one of the reasons why I love it so much is that it's got this game element, the scavenger hunt. So yeah, I know you said you didn't know where you got like sort of the clues from, but what inspired you to include a game element to start with? And did you always know how integral to the plot it would be?
No. So this is one of those, I tend to be more of a plotter now than I was when I wrote this. Back then I was very, I'm a pantser. But I hadn't written many books by then, and I soon realized it's very hard to just sustain that. So, but this book I actually did not plot out. And so I was just kind of like writing it as it came to me. So, at one point I was writing and I was like, oh, she gets the email. What's in the email? A link. What does the link lead to? A recipe blog. What does the recipe blog have on it? Threats. It's just like, it was one of those things where you allow yourself to discover the story, which I think is really fun. It doesn't work all the time, but for some books it does. And for this one it did. So it really was kind of a fun process of allowing the story to almost tell itself through me, which sounds so cheesy, but for this particular book, that's how it happened. And so it was just like, it was really fun to sort of discover the blog. Writing the little poems and things were a little bit harder, but it's the bones of it kind of just like appeared in my mind. I don't know.
That's so cool. And I know I love the poems when we're reading those, and those were like really sort of like intricate clues. And I remember like for so long when I just like, there was one in particular I got really stuck on, and I was trying to work it out like ahead of Kay and I couldn't do it. And then like when Kay sort of like worked it out, I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that? Because yeah, it was kind of like really like great foreshadowing in that sense, because it was foreshadowed enough for it to be believable once it was revealed, but it wasn't over foreshadowed where I saw it coming. And yeah, I just love that so much. But yeah, let's talk about your main character, Kay, because
Mm-hmm.
like I love dark characters, and I love characters that are really like complex with like a dark past. And Kay has like all of this basically, really
Mm-hmm.
complex female teen. And yeah, do you have any tips for writers wanting to write complex teen girls?
So I love that kind of character too. It's my favorite kind of character. But I have noticed that it can be it's a taste. Either you love or you hate that kind of character often. And I know that Kay is someone that a lot of people just hated. Just like talking to people and like, yes, I've read some reviews and stuff. It's very hard not to. And like I've heard things like she's irredeemable and like the worst person who ever lived and things like that. So my one tip is actually it's not something I did, which is, just be sure before you write a character that you wouldn't want to hang out with, that you're okay if people hate that character, because it does make it's more of a struggle. You have to want the reader to root for the book. People will say, this is an opinion and not everyone's going to agree with this. People will say that you have to root for the main character. I think you don't. I think you just have to root for the story. A friend of mine, who is another author, had told me that she actually heard from a producer at some point that you absolutely don't have to like the main character, but you have to want to know what happens to them. So I'm going to steal that tip and pass it along, because I found it so helpful. Because I really got stuck for a while, and I was just like, oh my God, all I know how to write is these dark, unlikable characters, because they fascinate me and I want to write about them. And there are plenty of likable characters out there. I could read so many right now and it would be like fantastic, but I want to write like ones that are a little trickier to get on board with. And so like, what's that key? What's the secret ingredient to writing that and not making people want to like throw tomatoes at you? And I think this person that I've never met, but I heard through a friend of mine, hit the nail on the head, is that you have to care what happens to them, even if you really, really dislike them.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love that, because I haven't heard like that before, but it totally makes sense. And I think one of the other reasons why I rooted for Kay, even though she wasn't the most likable character, but you also reveal that a lot of the other characters have like this capacity to be evil. And I really liked how sort of like even like the characters that come across as like really good at the start.
Ooh.
Of ambiguous and like morally grey as well. So I was really, really. Oh, am I back?
Yeah.
Can you see me? Hear me?
Yes, you froze and now
you're back. Did I get cut off at?
You got cut off at some of the characters started off really good, and then you came back at morally grey.
Okay, yeah. No, I was just saying, like, even the characters that you present as being like a good character, you reveal how they have this capacity to sort of like be quite evil in their decisions and how it affects other people. And you've got like so many characters who are really like morally ambiguous and morally grey. And I just love that, because it's not sort of like black and white with like they're good or bad. You show sort of the flaws and the sort of capacity to be evil, and it just made it so much more realistic. And I think that because you had that going on with the other characters, that made me sort of like want to root for Kay a bit more, because her darkness was sort of like explained by her past.
So, I definitely did not really let any of the characters off the hook, I guess. I think it is a little bit easier if the whole landscape of the book is sort of populated with characters. It's weird if all the characters are kind of like, oh, we shouldn't do that, but then there's one person, it happens to be the main character, who's just like, nah, I'm gonna like cause chaos and ruin everyone's life. So yeah, they're all tricky.
So how long did it take you to write this book, sort of like from the very first concept of the idea to the finished manuscript that you turned into your agent?
So I didn't have an agent when I started writing it. I fast drafted it in about a month. I sent it off to beta readers, and they were very quick. I was lucky with that. They took like a week, 2 weeks tops. And I was very green at that point. I didn't really know how the business worked. I wasn't very hooked up. Like now it's very easy to find like a writing community, and maybe it was back then and I just didn't know it, but I didn't really have one and I didn't really know what you were supposed to do. So I went through one round of beta readers, did one round of revisions, and then queried it right away, which, you know, it's not always like the best way to do things. But so it got to my agent, or the person who ended up being my agent in that state. Then we went through a round of light revisions and then it went out.
Nice. So yeah, is that sort of like a normal process for your writing and your drafting? Is that what's your next books as well, or has the writing process changed much?
Oh my gosh. So it's funny. Oh, are you back? Am I back? You froze for a sec. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and see you.
Oh, okay. Great. So I do often draft very quickly, my first drafts. And I don't know if everybody is like this, but it would make sense to me. When you write fast first drafts, it takes a little bit longer on revision. So for example, the book that I have coming out next year, I mean, this is probably not normal, but I drafted it probably again in just a few weeks. I remember because I was on vacation when I did it in like 2017, because it was right after I finished People Like Us, and I turned it to copy edits and immediately sat down and just wrote this one out really quickly. But my first editor didn't like it, and then it went through years of rewrites, just years. So I rewrote it with my agent a bunch of times.
Okay.
And then, you know, obviously, and then I did an R&R with one editor, and then my editor, who's actually my editor, also obviously had me go through edits. So it's, I think for me, usually a short process for the first draft and a nice sort of slower, more thoughtful process for the subsequent drafts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I'm kind of a bit like you. My first back to doing the revision stage compared to I know who like plot out a lot first. So yeah, just sort of like linking to time management as well quite a bit, I find. So oh, are you still there? I think you've frozen again.
Oh. Hello. Hi.
Can you still hear me or see me?
Yeah, I can see you and hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's my Wi-Fi. It keeps sort of like going out a bit and then everything just freezes. But yeah, we're back now.
Okay.
Yeah, so going back to People Like Us, I did just want to sort of like say about the title, because I love how the title can be sort of like interpreted in two different ways. And when I was reading the book, that suddenly like became apparent to me when I was about halfway through the book. And then I was like, oh my God, how did I not realize this before? So which interpretation of a title do you tend to go with?
So first of all, it's not my title. I had a different title. I originally wrote it with the title Skeleton Dance, which my agent pointed out to me as soon as I had an agent. She was like, that kind of sounds like a fantasy book. I think we should come up with a new title. And I thought about it and I was like, oh, that does kind of sound fantasy. You know, skeletons don't really dance in contemporaries. So it's the name of this dance that they all go to in the book, but it is misleading, I think, on a shelf. So we came up, I'm terrible at titling is another thing just about me as a writer, is that my titles never make it to the printed book. And so we ended up making a very long list of possibilities, and my agent came up with the title People Like Us. So I don't know what she had in mind actually, but I like to think of it as you can read it either way. And I read it both ways. I think it works really well that way because it's about these group of people who are not likable at all. The likability is such an interesting part of this book, but they're not likable at all. But they have a lot. It's a bunch of mean girls. You know, they're not likable, but people have to act like they like them. And it, you know, I guess it goes to the question of like, what does it mean to be liked? Do people actually like you, or do they just have to sort of perform liking? And then there's people who are similar to us, because one of the characters says at some point or something like, oh, people are more forgiving to people like them or something. I have no idea what I wrote at this point. It was so long ago. But yeah, I like the double read, I guess.
Yeah, I really liked that. And yeah, as I was saying, it's only like when I was halfway through that I suddenly realized it had like the double meaning, because I was just thinking it was people like who are similar to us rather than people like liking you. So yeah, but I just had like a massive like aha moment when I suddenly like realized the sort of like double meaning of a title, and it was just like, it was really satisfying to suddenly realize that as well. And I think part of the reason why I felt that was well, the pacing in this book is so fast and the tension is always high, and it's kind of a bit like a roller coaster. And that was one of the things that really like kept me turning the pages so quick, because I read this book in like 2 days or something, and normally I'm a lot slower. But yeah, like your pacing is just like phenomenal in this book. So I was wondering, do you have any tips for writers who are perhaps struggling with patience and tension, and sort of like knowing when to have like the high tension moments?
It's tough because, like I said, I didn't plot this one. I actually struggle with pacing when I plot, and when I don't, it tends to come easier. But there's like kind of a little it's like horrible to admit this, but I'm a fan of books. I'm a super fan of TV. And TV has kind of more of a serialized aspect, but good TV will also have an arc. So at the end of an episode, there's always a question posed, a sort of, not, it doesn't have to be a cliffhanger, but it has to be like drawing you into the next episode. And I write, I think, kind of with that mindset that like I love to end chapters like with a question of like, wait, so what happens with this? It doesn't have to be like on the central plot, but there always has to be a question posed towards, like towards the end of the chapter that like goes like, okay, one more page. Because my favorite books do that. Like I will finish a book in a night if I really like it. And it's always a book that like each chapter you have to go to the next one. If I can put it down, I will, and I probably won't pick it up again. I'm a really brutal reader, but that's probably why I love thrillers and horror books, because you have to know.
Yeah, definitely. So they almost sort of like make you read them. Like you can't sort of stop. You've got to know immediately what happens next. And that's definitely the feeling I got when reading yours. Yeah. So what are you working on at the moment?
Believe it or not, I'm suspicious about, superstitious about like talking about things while I'm working on them, because I've had just bad luck in the past about being like, oh, this is going to be my next book. And then like I show it to my agent or my editor and she's just like, well, this is terrible. You're not doing this. So my agent would never say that. But I feel like I can say that I am happy writing horror thrillers right now. And I want to continue going in that direction and exploring different sort of subgenres within the horror thriller milieu, I guess. So I do have a couple things that I'm working on. One in particular that I'm focusing on at the moment, and it is a very specific subgenre of horror that was popular in the past, and I'm hoping it's going to make a resurgence. So we'll see.
Right, I'll keep an eye out for like any sort of like tweets or anything about that, because I'm just so intrigued at that. And I know that like whatever book you work on, I'm going to want to read it sort of like straight away. So but yeah, so what are your favorite YA thrillers and sort of like YA horror as well?
Oh no. There was this question on the thing.
It was not, but now I'm intrigued.
My favorite YA thrillers. Let me think. Let's see. I really love Allegedly. That one's gonna pop up off the top of my head right away. It's hard to talk about it without spoilers. But I love that type of, if you've read it, then you know what I mean when I say that type of thriller. It's a very specific kind of
definitely
story, the way that it progresses, and completes itself, I guess. So that was one that I really, really enjoyed to the last page. Let me think of other favorites. I enjoyed The Cheerleaders a lot by Kara Thomas.
Oh,
yeah. Just came out, Ace of Spades. And
yeah, I've got that on my list to read, but I haven't really heard much about that one yet. So that's sort of like next up for me.
You're in for a treat. And then I would just add We Were Liars is like kind of like one of my first, I think that was the first YA kind of a thriller, kind of like, I don't know why they call it a thriller, but either way, it was the first one that I read. And so it's always stuck with me. It's always kind of, it has like a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I love We Were Liars too. Yeah, because it was one of the first ones that I read as well, and it really sort of like introduced me to the genre. So yeah, it's a great starting place.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just thinking, because a lot of the books that you've just sort of like recommended, they all have like unreliable narrators.
Oh,
some sort of capacity.
I guess you can say that.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking Kay is quite an unreliable narrator as well. Because like she does withhold information from a reader sort of intentionally, especially about her past. So yeah, do you want to talk a bit about unreliable narrators just because we've got a few more minutes?
Sure. Yeah, I actually, I do. You pointed out a pattern that I wasn't actually thinking about. I do. I love books with unreliable narrators. It's so funny because I know a lot of readers that are just like, oh, I'm so over unreliable narrators. And I'm like, how? That's like saying you're over ice cream, you know? Like,
yeah.
I really enjoy it because I think that people are unreliable narrators. I did not come up with that. I'm sure I read that in an interview of a famous author, now that I think about it. But people are unreliable narrators. We edit ourselves. We don't tell the truth. We don't tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And we're just talking in our everyday lives. You know, most of us are on social media, on Instagram, and we curate our lives. And we do that in everyday conversation too. So I like it as a storytelling device because I think it's a very human story way of storytelling that is sort of just very naturally creates tension and suspense. And like it can, in horror and in thriller, it can kind of create these sort of an atmosphere of paranoia, which is like, it's very helpful. I guess it's a hack in a way. Maybe people don't like it, but it's still really fun. And I think it's fun kind of like going along with the character that you're interested in and kind of being like, you know, I like you. I don't know if I can trust you. Let me stick with you and try to get to know you. And so I guess that's what really intrigues me about that kind of narrator.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of that. And I just love unreliable narrators. Like, as you say, they are really realistic and you can sort of relate to them. And often when you've got an unreliable narrator, it's because they're hiding something quite dark and quite major. And straight away, if you know that you're reading an unreliable narrator, you're also going to know that there's going to be sort of a twist later on relating to their reliability and the information they withhold. So I think it can be like really good for sort of like maintaining pace, like fast pace and tension towards the end of a book as well. Yeah, so do you have any sort of general writing tips for like new writers or aspiring writers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my biggest tip is always, you know, find people who you can share your work with and who kind of you gel with just as a support group in general. It took me a while to get that, to like understand that that was as important as writing every day, but it is. Let's see, I have like a writers group now and they're really great. Read a lot. Let me think. I would say like, don't be afraid to, I mean, this is like all of this advice anyone could argue you should do the opposite. And I think that's true of writing advice. But I think you shouldn't be afraid to just write what you want to write in a sense. A lot of times what I did with this story, which I would not necessarily, no, I would still do it. But I wouldn't follow this advice. is like you try to guess what the trends are, or you try to guess what an editor is going to want, or what an agent is going to want, or what people are going to want to read. And that's just, it's an impossible task. You're not going to be able to, you might get lucky once. And so I think that even though like I'm like, it's a really bad habit of mine that I tend to do that sometimes, I think it's much more fun and rewarding to write kind of like the story that's like in your heart or kicking around your head, rather than being like, you know, I think people are going to get into vampires again or something, and writing a vampire book.
Yeah, that's really great advice, because we really need to sort of love what we're writing and write what we want to, and not what we think we should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know when I'm writing, if I'm writing something that my heart's not like completely in it, I'm sure readers would be able to tell. Because like, if it's not something I want to write, then I'm not going to write it as well as something that I do want to write. So yeah, that's really great advice.
I think it's true. And also just because, you know, like not every book sells, and you'll be, I think, happy that you wrote something that you want to write if it doesn't end up working out. But if you forced yourself to write it and then it doesn't work out, you're just going to be like, why did I do this to myself?
Yeah, definitely. And also like with how long sort of like revisions and editing can take, like with so many rounds of it, if you're then stuck with a manuscript that your heart's not really in, that's going to be a lot harder for you to edit and sort of like stay enthusiastic about for the amount of time required.
Totally. I think, I don't know. It would be interesting to do a poll and see how many authors still love their book by the time you get to copy edits. Because I definitely, by that point, I'm like, I don't want to see this again.
Oh, same. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like you just never want to look at it again once you've got like to the final sort of stages. But yeah. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining me today. Do you want to just finish by telling readers where they can find your book?
Yes, and if I may, just quickly plug my upcoming books.
Oh yes, definitely. Yes.
It's not till next summer, but next summer I have 2 books coming out. One is another YA thriller. It's a horror thriller, Summer's Edge, about a group of friends that go to a lake house. And it's a year after the anniversary of their friend's death, and strange, bad things begin to happen. So I've pitched it as I Know What You Did Last Summer meets The Haunting of Hill House. And then the other one is a graphic novel. It'll be out around the same time, I think April. And it's a teen thriller retelling of Hamlet. So it's really fun. I love the art. It's really gorgeous. So yeah. So anyway, I had to. So
of course, yes.
This one, People Like Us, it's been out for a while. You can find it at Barnes and Noble. You know, I forget what's the name of that. Shoot. There's a website that uses. You can buy things through your local indie bookstore, and I'm just blanking on the name of it.
Oh, is it Bookshop?
It might be Bookshop, yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously Amazon, and probably your big retailer near you, but I'm not sure anymore because it's just been a while, and I don't know if it's still stocked there. But you can definitely get it through Bookshop or Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Great, yeah, and I definitely recommend that all reviewers watching this definitely do that, because it is an amazing book.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.